Oh, like Trisha Goddard, how are you?
Thank you for that, Alex.
It's nice to talk to you. I tell you why, because you seem to know what you're doing and you're not scared of it, are you? You do it with confidence.
I would hope so. That comes after a lifetime and a lot of different experiences. If you like, getting a degree through the University of Life.
And you've had one. I've just read this new book of yours, and what a life it's been. That's got to help with a TV show, hasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know how much I've experienced, because we all think of our lives as normal or ordinary, even though I've called the book a life less ordinary. But yes, it does help. And add to that I've spent a good 20 years working in the area of mental health as well. You know, and parenting and a lot of different other things that I've added to my basic journalism, if you like. And yes, the show had that extra dimension because of that.
And let's talk about your life right from the beginning. What were you like as a child? Were you always curious?
Oh, gosh, yes. I was irrepressible. I had a hell of a lot of energy. Great imagination, which I used to escape things. If things weren't very good, I'd go and escape in my own little world, be it with Barbie dolls, taking them camping and spinning out, actually making films in my head, as it were, adventures. And I actually started making films for real when I was about 13 or 14. In fact, I was one of the runners-up in the BBC's Young Film Director of the Year award for a couple of years. And another runner-up was this young guy called Nick Parks. Did these silly cartoons. And I met up with him a few years ago at a do at Buckingham Palace. And he said, I remember you were one of the runners-up with your film. And, and there's, of course, Nick Parks has gone on to do Wallace and Gromit. So we said, let's go and find John Craven. So we went off and found John Craven, and we said, you might not remember us, but we were both runners up in Young Film Director of the Year award in the same year. And he said, really, who came first? And we said, exactly. Why didn't we win?
What was Nick like in those days? Because I had him on the programme a couple of years ago and did an hour with him, and he was the most peculiar but lovable man I've ever met.
Nerd is the word, I think. But see, I would have been seen as a nerd, because in those days, to make films, we were using cement, splicing, using razor blades to file down the end of the film and match it up. And for a 13-year-old girl to be heavily into doing that was seen as a bit weird. Having said that, my younger daughter, who's 15, is heavily into things like mixing music and the technical side of a lot of things, so I guess I've passed it on. But I suppose I had a nerdy side of me, which I used because in order to sort of augment my imagination in my head was all very well, but I had to sort of, if you like, get it out. So I either wrote a lot, and I did a lot of writing. In fact, I dedicated in part the book to Mrs. Millard, my English teacher at school. I did a lot of writing, and I did a lot of filmmaking, and I was prepared to learn the technical side of stuff in order to get my storytelling or my telling of my life across.
It's interesting, when I've read parts of your book, the one thing that seems to come across to me, and I could be wrong, is that you're very focused, you're very determined and very tenacious. That's how you became such a big star down under. You've really become a bigger name down there through your production company than you have here through the TV show.
I know. It's a bit scary. When I think I was 9, I got a diary, and I wrote in it, I am going to play music, I'm going to travel the world, I'm going to be in a band, and I'm going to be a film producer. Well, I did travel the world. I was an air stewardess based in Bahrain during my 20s for 5 years. Played music, yes. I was in an all-girl band for a number of years, from, say, 15 up to 20. Eventually, we went touring. And film producer, I didn't get to be a film producer, but in those days, the idea of working in television was pretty far removed. The only black people you saw on television was the fledgling Jackson 5, actually. So, I pretty well fulfilled what I wrote in that diary at 9, so I guess you could call that focused, driven, weird.
Obsessive compulsive?
Yes, that too.
Just very quickly on the Jacksons, how do you feel about Michael Jackson?
Shocked but not surprised. I think a lot of people have said that, because I was talking to my kids about that, and we said, which stars can we imagine old And Michael Jackson, we just said we couldn't imagine him old. Someone like Madonna, you can imagine old because she seems so disciplined and she doesn't do drugs or anything, and she's just so focused, and she's an athlete. Anybody who's a dancer is an athlete. People like Michael Jackson, and I hate to say it, people like Britney Spears, who've not had a childhood and have a whole load of issues that they've either dealt with or not dealt with in the public arena, been surrounded by sycophants and yes people without much idea of who they really are. They're the people that, in a mental health sense, would flag up all the warning signs. I trust me, people like Michael Jackson, Britney Spears, Amy Winehouse, all of those people were, as young people, had some doings with a mental health service. They would have had an at-risk tag put to them, and they would have got more help, more assistance and more support living, say, on a council estate or in everyday life than they would as a star. I actually do believe I know a lot of celebrities go through a lot of hell, go through a lot of things, are subject to a lot of things that they would not have to go through if they were ordinary people. There would be some intervention early on.
It's hard to sympathise, though, when you're a multimillionaire and being given everything from a person who doesn't have that. It's hard to understand why it's so difficult. And I suppose with your mental health background, you have an insight into why some people can handle it and some people can't.
Yeah, I think that there's two things. It's interesting. There are some people who I believe become successful because of their past, and their past could be adverse. I have to say I've met a lot of people who've had a lot of problems in their early lives and said, I'm going to show them, and become successful. I'd say there's a 60% amongst British inverted commas celebrities like that. Of those people, there are a number who can handle what it brings their way. There's a whole load of people who really believe it when fans say, I love you, I love you. I always say, when people say, oh, you're so lucky, you've got all those people who love you. Are they the same sorts of people who would love you when you're vomiting down the toilet bowl or incontinent? No, I don't think so. They love what you represent. But there are those people who have been childhood celebrities who've had maybe difficult backgrounds, or just, how do you stuff up when it's written all over the papers? I mean, every child, every young person stuffs up, but when that becomes something that is revisited year after year after year, 15, 20 years later, remember when she shaved off her hair 30 years later, and you haven't got the most stable of backgrounds anyway, add to that all the hangers on, you're wonderful, you're amazing. No one who actually says, no, you're being a fool, stop, because they don't want to cut off the money, the fame, etc. And that makes for a very dangerous cocktail.
So you're saying you wouldn't be surprised if you were to read a tragedy about someone like Britney Spears, because she's just going around that vicious circle of show business and continues to?
Well, when does somebody say, and manage to stay and give her some boundaries and controls? And I would argue, people say, oh, well, the parents. I'm sorry, if it wasn't there in the beginning, you have to question what was going on. There are some very grounded celebrities. I'd offer up Justin Timberlake as one, and you don't become. It's not just people from the inverted commas ideal home background who become celebrities. There are actually a lot of damaged people who become celebrities. And as I say, with the sycophants, when, if you've got a choice between becoming ill or signing yourself off and having a year off and maybe having some psychotherapy, or going out and doing 50 concerts that's going to earn a shed load of money for a load of agents, dancers, managers, etc., is your manager going to say, you know what, stuff the fact that I can make how many millions from you doing 50 concerts, you have a lie down for it a year? I don't think so.
Let's get back to you, because there's so much to talk about your life and what's been written in the papers recently. You write this book about your life, and then, of course, certain newspapers take elements of it and turn it into a big thing. How does it feel when you become the news, opposed to interviewing people about their lives and trying to make the news?
It is uncomfortable. I come from a journalistic background. I was an Aussie newsroom journalist, and trust me, if you did your sign off too long, your editor would be going, mate, I timed your sign off, it was 30 bloody seconds, who do you think the star is, So you kept your head down and you did your job. So I was never comfortable with the celebrity kind of aspect. A lot of people say, oh, well, then why tell your story? Initially, it came about because after I had my breakdown in 1994, I was in a psych hospital, and unfortunately, there's always somebody who wants to make money out of your story. And I got a call on the psych hospital from someone saying, we know you're in there, we're going to do a story on it. And that, at a time when you feel at your lowest and your most vulnerable and panicky, is the most terrifying thing, because up until then, no one knew that I had gone into the psychiatric hospital. So luckily I had a publicist at the channel I was at that in those days, Channel 10 in Sydney, and I'd helped her husband when he'd had some problems with depression. So she said, look, we'll manage this. And we called up a journalist whose partner I'd also helped when he'd had some mental health problems. And we went round to her house. I was really shaky. They signed me out of the hospital. And with this journalist who kind of, I knew would report it responsibly because she'd had dealings with mental illness and mental health, we did the story. And we said, yep, I've had a breakdown, this is what's happened. I had to say that my marriage had broken up because obviously, what do you say when you're asked about your partner? And we did that one interview, that one story, and that killed off the paparazzi and it killed off the story. And if they were going to write about it, they had to do it from a factually correct base. Well, of course, with the internet and what have you, that story's regurgitated, 15 years later. But again, the same thing with my breast cancer. Nobody, bar my very, very closest family, my husband and daughters and my business partner, knew about that until somebody saw me at the hospital. And, the rest, as they say, is history.
Earlier on this programme, I was talking to Jerry Springer about his programme, and he basically is embarrassed by it. He has no problem saying that it's a load of rubbish and that if you choose to watch it, that's up to you. He personally wouldn't. How do you feel about your programme, Trisha?
It's very different, and I know Jerry. I've met Jerry and we've discussed this. It is a very, very different kettle of fish. Jerry doesn't say that he's got any expertise in doing anything except for highlighting absurdities and stirring the pot a bit. I come to the programme with a whole different set of skills, journalistic, conflict resolution, which I've studied, mental health, which I've been in and continue to be involved in, parenting, again, ditto the same thing. So it stands to reason that I'm going to use those tools to work through my show. And I think that's the thing about chat shows. They take on the values of the person actually doing the show. So, for instance, someone would come onto my show for a completely different set of reasons, and they would go on to Jerry Springer's show, or in fact Jeremy Kyle's show. You tend to find people who are genuine about wanting to change things and wanting help aim towards my show because they know of my background. They know that I'm going to listen, and they know I have a firm set of skills, a set of skills that the Australian government used for 10 years, that I've used with the health service and mental health services in this country. So they know I'm going to employ all of that experience in listening to their problems. I'm not going to bully them. I'm not going to call them names. I'm not going to just stir them up for the sake of stirring them up. But yes, people are going to say, yes, it's a television program. There is a way of marrying the two, and I would never put my mental health credentials in jeopardy, or a person's life in jeopardy with the show.
What do you think about that low-life scumbag, Jeremy Kyle?
Everybody always asks me that. Why do they ask me that? Listen, as I said, his show takes on his persona. I've seen his show.
It's not very clever, though, is it? Bringing people on to just laugh at them, humiliate them, and make them look stupid just for ratings. I think there's got to be a moral conscience there, and this man doesn't seem to see that at all. Well,
all I can say is I look at things wearing a mental health hat. I mean, how can I not, since I'm so deeply involved in it? And I know that we had guests on our show who had maybe been to his show to do a DNA test, because we wouldn't DNA test babies anymore. I decided, I brought DNA testing to television in this country, as I did the lie detector test. But then I sort of felt sick about the DNA testing of babies. We sometimes enable people to DNA test their children, but away from, nothing to do with the television studios, and we wouldn't report on it or identify the child or the parents or anything. That was between them and our producers in a very quiet back room. But we'd often have guests who'd had a DNA test or something that we would not provide, or had a lie detector test we would not provide, because we wouldn't provide those in cases of violence, domestic violence, for ethical reasons. But those guests would go on his show, everything would kick off, they find themselves really, really, really in extra deep poo, and they would come to our show, and we constantly found that we were unraveling a lot of stuff that had been stirred up or had come about as a result of being on their show. Now, they do have, inverted commas, aftercare. I'm not sure whether their aftercare involved a psychotherapist. I'd have to look at Graham's qualifications, but we do involve counsellors, qualified counsellors, qualified psychotherapists, and you can see that from our website. We're linked up to certain charities who would no way link up with us if we didn't have, and I didn't have those credentials.
He is doing it for entertainment because he seems to just love to make people look stupid. And I have an issue with that because I think the people who are going on the programme probably aren't as savvy as he is or you are.
If it rates, they'll put it on. And if it's between the gorgeous Lorraine Kelly show and This Morning, it'll rate. It's not a difficult slot to keep ratings in that place. So you can afford to be a bit adventurous, and you can afford to be a bit nice. I mean, if I was a producer and if I was an executive producer and I was working on the Jeremy Carr show, I would send him away to do a proper sort of basic course in psychology and counselling. But then that would spoil it, wouldn't it? Because he wouldn't be able to call people names.
And he is a low-life scumbag, let's face it.
Move on.
All right, let's move on from that. Next cab off the rank I need to talk about, of course, is your TV show, because I understand that they're getting rid of it because they can't afford it. That seems a shame to get rid of a programme.
Yeah, we got so far ahead in making programmes, because I worked all through last summer during my chemotherapy, that, we've, as a production company, we've stopped producing the show because we have enough in the bag, to go to the end of the year. And no, they haven't got any money. But I think what's happened, well, I'm pretty sure what's happened to Channel 5 is going to be happening to a lot of other television stations. ITV is looking at their daytime lineup, and the harsh reality of economics is that shows like Kyle, myself, This Morning are very people intensive. They employ a lot of people, and then they have audiences, they have a lot of guests, they have experts, and they're financial juggernauts. And television is looking to make cheaper and cheaper programs like Loose Women, for instance, on ITV, programs like the excellent program that comes before ours. Sorry, I've got chemo brain, so I've forgotten Matthew Wright's show. Yeah. Matthew Wright's great show. Those shows operate on the smell of an oily rag, and so those shows are the models towards which daytime television.
But does it mean they're better, though? That's just because they're cheap doesn't necessarily mean they're better, does it?
No, it doesn't. But I have to say, in the case of Loose Women and in the case of The Right Stuff, those are I picked those because they are, I think, good examples. I mean, having a rigorous journalist like Matthew do that program does add something and gives a voice to everyday ordinary people to comment on what's happening in the news. And I have to say, oh dear, I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but I have to say my only problem with Loose Women, I mean, I think it's fantastic that they have women, across the age groups and what have you. How can I say this? Somebody said it's a shame that show is so driven snow. Now that's a very
I don't know what you mean, love. Come on, slap it on the table.
What driven snow means, it is very white middle class. and there's nothing wrong in that. But I would love to see more of a mix in their panelists. I mean, I'm thinking people like Shobna Gulati, who's got a lot to talk about. She's got a good head on her shoulder. There are a lot of people who are from non-Anglo backgrounds who would be fantastic on that show. And it would mean that when you're discussing something, when you're discussing a subject, at the moment you get it from the Daily Express / Daily Mail point of view, maybe with a little bit of Daily Mirror in, and very rarely do you get the Daily Star unless they have Jim Davidson on. But it would be nice to have more of a representative mix, because we are a hodgepodge society.
So do you think it's deliberate then?
There is something that comes up at Edinburgh Television, every year. The fact is, the decision making that goes into television tends to, by and large, be made by, we call it the Kensington Triangle, so Kensington, Holland Park, maybe the more daring person lives in Islington. But if your staff come from predominantly a particular sort of area and socioeconomic group, they're going to reflect that. Those are the people they know.
Is there any diversity backstage at that show, do you know?
I don't know, but it's not just what's backstage, it's what's genuinely in management and how people are looking at things. People often ask how we got the guests we got and the range, and I know, as far as ethnic involvement or multicultural involvement, I know that the audiences that I had both at ITV and Channel 5 were the most ethnically diverse, and we know that on ITV because ITV used to use us for surveys, etc. So and people say, how do we get the guests we have? Our staff totally reflected. We had a guy who was an ex-burger flipper. We had job share. We didn't just get our kids from university. Some of them were. We had Asian, black. We had every hodgepodge, single, mum sharing.
All right then, Trisha, jobs. I've got a question for you.
Yep.
I'm the executive producer of Loose Women. I pick up the phone and I say, Trisha, do you want to come on Loose Women as one of the presenters? What do you say?
I would say, yeah, I'll do a couple of days a week, but I'm a mum, so I can't schlep down from Norfolk every single day. Yeah, I would do it. I did do. Actually, Loose Women in the early days was made by Anglia at Anglia Studios, and they used to ask me to do quite a few shows because I'm very flattered that my chat show was rating so highly that by coming on the show when it was in its fledgling days and people didn't kind of know what it was, it assisted the ratings and it made people think, oh, okay, that's what it introduced people to Loose Women. So I was right there at the beginning, and in fact, producers from my chat show were behind Loose Women in its early days.
Do you think it was a better show when Kay Adams presented it?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I think it was a different show because obviously if you put someone with a journalistic leaning towards it...
Colleen Nolan was on the other week. She felt that.
Did she?
Yeah, she said she preferred... She felt she gave gravitas to it. It's become a bit silly. She said there was too much laughing and nonsense on it. Yeah,
I do think you need to have a journalist because initially the idea came from the American programme. And when you look at The View, which is the American programme, which I was approached years ago about going on, but they have people like Barbara Walters, they have Connie Chung, they have
Whoopi Goldberg now presenting it.
Yeah, Whoopi Goldberg, but they have a whole range. But we say Whoopi Goldberg, yes, she's a comedian, but I've met Whoopi.
She's a star.
She has got. So, she's the sort of person that when I met her, she was just trotting around New Orleans on her own, no entourage. Yep. She has a deep interest and has done a lot of stuff behind the scenes on social issues. She's a businesswoman because she's got her own production company. So there's a lot of gravitas to Whoopi on top. You think of Sister Act and what have you. Yep. So she's a 360-degree woman.
And of course, if you want to see a picture of Trish and the gorgeous Whoopi Goldberg, it's in your book.
It is, yeah.
See, I have read it.
Yes.
Listen, we could talk all day because I haven't even touched the surface. We've got your cancer to cover and all that. Will you come back on the show again?
I'd love to.
And can we do it face to face? Because you're at your home in somewhere in Barbados or somewhere.
Oh, Norfolk.
And I'm in my studio here. So, very funny. What would you like to do next? That was a question I was going to ask you that is important. How about we fire Jeremy Kyle and give you his show again?
Oh, I don't know. I've done daytime chat shows for 11 years. I've loved doing the bit of radio that I've done. I tell you what I'd like. I would like, if I could have anything, I would have a radio show on BBC Radio 4, because they have approached me and they've been honest enough to admit that the sorts of guests I get to talk to me and the demographic to which I appeal is one that they've completely got diddly squat idea of attracting, and that they would like to. So I would really love to do a radio show. I have to be honest, Vanessa Feltz, at first, I had my question marks about her. I think she's brilliant on radio. I think radio was the best thing that happened to her.
Well, she's got a face for radio, you see. That's what it is.
Oh, how cruel. She's quick, she's bright, she's on the button. She's a bit mad with some of her ideas, but she works on radio. I think she's a very very talented lady when it comes to radio. I would like to be the poor people's Piers Morgan. Try saying that quickly. I think there's a slot for, and it would be very cheap, for a daily a commercial half-hour show where one-on-one, where I could interview people behind the news, because I know I've done interviews with people who normally...
Well, you're a communicator, that's what you are. It doesn't matter who you're talking to.
Well, Baby P's grandmother contacted the show, came on to the show. There's been a lot of people in the news, Colin Stagg, what have you, a lot of people in the news who actually say, I've never done any interviews before, but I'll come onto your show. And I think there's a slot for a daily half-hour with an interactive element on online afterwards to discuss the issue. I really think that's on my wish list.
Well, good luck to you. I'm sure you'll do it, because you're so tenacious and good at what you do. There aren't many people like that. You've got a new book in the stores. Final question then, of these four people, rate them best to worst. Yep. Trisha, Vanessa, Jeremy, Jerry. Who's got the best show?
Well, I'm totally biased, so I'd say Trisha, Vanessa, Jerry, and who's the other one? Jeremy Kyle at the bottom. Brilliant. Fantastic. Trisha Goddard, thank you so much for talking to me.